Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in today's video, I'm bringing you my 10.1 racial tier list. Obviously, there are a lot of different classes that are powerful right now in 10.1, and you want to make sure that you're always performing at your peak. And obviously, some of the racials have become more valuable now than others because of this shift in the meta of classes. So by the end of this video, you're going to have a really good idea of which racials are going to be a good fit for you in competitive play in 10.1 for Dragonflight. So let's get started. We've got Blood Elf. Unfortunately, Blood Elf not really powerful. It's going to give you the ability to AoE Purge, which can be all right as like a clutch moment to remove a Blessing of Protection, but Paladins are not really that great right now. And other than that, it's really not going to be removing too much. There's a lot of other debuffs that get covered up. So for me, honestly, Blood Elf is like, it's not a D, it's probably a C. It's not the absolute worst. Oddly enough, there's actually ones that are worse than this, but not really a fantastic pick. Dark Iron Dwarf, this is one that dominated Season 1 of Dragonflight. I still think that it's going to be a dominant performance here in Season 2 and 10.1 of Dragonflight. The ability to get out of Solar Beams from Boomkins for healers is really good. The ability to just strip off all of the debuffs. Feral Druids are still a bit prevalent. Assassination Rogue a little bit less, but still really good for removing extra debuffs onto yourself while providing you an extra boost of stats when you do decide to activate it. So still a really good pick. If you are Dark Iron Dwarf, you could still likely stay it, but there might be some others to consider. Dracthyr, there's really nothing to talk about this because you don't have a choice. If you're an evoker, you have to be Dracthyr. Nobody else really can. So Dracthyr, I'm just throwing it down here because there's really no choice for it. For Draenei, you're going to be getting an extra heal over time effect from Gift of the Naru, which can be decent extra healing support, especially given we're in like a caster meta with a lot of extra damage, but its cooldown is pretty long. Because of that, it's kind of just much like Blood Elf, where it's like, can be good situationally. Maybe the value is a bit higher than Blood Elf. It's pretty close. You're probably getting a little bit more value than Blood Elf overall with this. The extra healing, it will be nice, especially if you're like a DPS. There are other racials, though, that are likely going to be stronger. For Dwarf, I think Dwarf has honestly fallen off, mostly because Assassination Rogues are pretty much non-existent. Feral Druid is still here, but you could just be Dark Iron and get the stat benefit. So it's honestly, I think Dwarf is honestly falling off pretty hard. I'd put it down here on C, maybe even D. It's still going to be really good when you do encounter an Assassination Rogue or a Feral Druid, but if you don't, it's not really doing a lot for you, honestly. It's not doing a huge amount for you. Undead, this one is still really strong. Warlocks and priests are really prevalent, so having the ability to remove fear gives you a little bit of extra damage. This one's a bit tough for me to say whether it's A or it's S. It's really hard for me to say this. And if you're a DPS, it's still pretty nice unless you're a class that can already break fears. So if you're a warrior, you're probably not going to want to go undead. But if you're a DPS and you can break fears, it can be situationally good there. It's not going to be the highest damage output, so it's probably going to be held back a bit. The utility is nice, but because it doesn't have the same type of damage element as other racials are going to be giving you, I'm going to be putting it onto A tier. Gnome, this is one that has shot up the stocks right now. If you're a healer and you can be a gnome, you should definitely be a gnome, because boomkins are all over the place. You're going to be encountering them more often than not. You still get the added benefit of being able to get out of a root or get out of a snare. Maybe if you're getting caught in a Frost Nova Ring of Frost from a mage or something like that, or a snare and you want to line of sight around the corner. For me, gnome is likely jumping up. If you're a healer, it's S. If you're a melee DPS, A tier. If you're a caster DPS, probably B tier. So this is like a mixed bag here for Gnome. I think because of that, I'm putting it on A tier. Again, melee DPS, A tier. Healer, it's S tier. And then range DPS, it's probably B tier. So you need to have that notes here for Gnome. Definitely need to have that. Goblin, nice little extra mobility. Nice little benefit of a little bit of extra haste. The mobility, it's similar to High Mountain Tauren because it's basically only got one thing that's good about it, similar to Draenei. I think it's probably fair to shoot it up here into the B tier. We've got High Mountain Tauren. High Mountain Tauren is the same as Goblin, gives you a little bit of extra mobility. You're going to get versatility and a little bit more damage reduction, though. And I think because of that, it's a little bit better than Goblin. But I don't know if I would say that it's A tier. This is a really tough pick. Not many races can be it. It's mostly kind of like a druid thing, but if you're a druid, you should be a night elf. So maybe it's holding it back a little bit. I still think it's slightly better than Goblin and Draenei. mostly because of the extra benefits that you're getting towards your versatility and damage reduction. If you're a target that gets attacked a lot, it can be really good for kiting. If you're a healer, you're pretty much never going to play it other than Druid. And even Druid should be Night Elf. So maybe it's better to put it on B tier, but like the best of the B tier. Human racial, still a really good option. Not as powerful as it was in the past, mostly because of the crowd control reductions that have come in. I think there might be a few better options than it now. I think because of that, maybe it's only an A tier. Seemingly for human, it's if you're a caster DPS, it's going to provide you likely the most benefit. Melee DPS still going to be giving you a decent benefit, but as a healer, I think it is likely better to be Gnome or Dark Iron, or even in some instances Night Elf. If you can't be those other ones, so like Druid is Night Elf, anything else is Gnome or Dark Iron. If it can't be Gnome, like Shaman will be Dark Iron. So I think because of that, it's coming down a little bit, only on the A and not the S tier. Kultiran, this can be a super fun racial, punching people away, getting a stun lock on them. It's definitely stronger than you would expect, but I wouldn't say that it's like A tier. It's probably B tier. It's kind of a fun, cheeky pick, maybe a bit more valuable than Goblin. Maybe Goblin should come down on C, because Goblin isn't as good as High Mountain. They're basically the same thing. You know, they charge forward, except I think the other benefits of High Mountain are a bit more beneficial than Goblin. Maybe we debate that. It's pretty close, right? We talked a lot about it. Lightforged Draenei, it's still pretty bad. Doesn't really do a lot of damage. I really only ever see like Ret Paladins every once in a while playing it. If it got a tuned up, it's likely could be really strong, right? Similar to Goblin's rocket gloves don't really do a lot of damage. Lightforged doesn't either. Where do I want to put this one is really the tough question. Is it D or is it C? I want to say it's like D. It's honestly not that spectacular. But is it a Magar Orc? Maybe it is. Maybe it's fair to put them all on this one. Then we've got that one right up next is Magar Orc. Pet damage, not too great. Random secondary stat. You might roll a stat that's not really that great for your class. So it's not going to be really powerful. Magar Orc is definitely going to fall off. Lightforged Draenei just doesn't do enough damage. Evoker, you got no choice. That's the only reason it's down here on D tier. Mechanome, this one, it's pretty decent. It gives you a little bit of extra survivability. Can be useful if you're a squishy ranged class. Something like a Fire Mage right now could be useful, but at the same time, you'd probably rather get more damage from being human, because it's just going to be really important to get more damage. So I think because of that, it's got a decent effect for PvP, but there's just going to be more value from other options, probably coming in the middle of the pack at B. Nightborne, I should have made a tier completely for Nightborne on its own, because it is absolutely terrible. It is the worst thing that you could possibly select in the game. So it's going on the bottom of the D tier. You get like I think it's like a 3-minute cooldown piercing howl. It's really bad. I would 100% say that you should avoid this at all costs. It is not going to be a good competitive option for you. Night Elf, this one is still an S tier. The ability to Shadow Meld a big hitting spell or an important crowd control and immune it. You get decent stat allocation when you're playing at night, at least with haste. If you're a day gamer, which I don't know how many of you are, it would be kind of strange. You get crit. It's not honestly that great. If you're a night gamer, you get really good stats and you get the ability to immune those effects. Orc can still be really good with the extra padded stun reduction and the extra on use trinket. I think it's probably coming in at about an A tier at the moment. I think, again, if you're a healer, better to be Dark Iron. If you're a Shaman, that's like the main competitive for Orc and Dark Iron. If you're a Shaman healer, you'd probably rather be Dark Iron. But it's not a terrible fallback if you couldn't be. It just means that as a Shaman, at least, you could actually maybe be Orc, because you can use Spirit Walk to get out of Solar Beam. Instead of the Dark Iron Dwarf Rachel. Maybe it's S tier or Orc. I don't feel like Resto Shaman's getting attacked too much. Ellie Shaman and Enhanced Shaman, it's decent. This one's a really tough one, honestly. Maybe it's like the best of the A tier. Organize this based on like best to worst or something like that, left to right. Panda, you're going to get a little bit of extra versatility. You get a nice little bit of instant crowd control. Can be a cheeky pick if you're like a Shadow Priest to get an extra DR of crowd control. Honestly, not the worst option, which many of you might be going in like, oh my God, Panda, it's going to be so terrible. But it's honestly, I don't even think it's close to the worst option. I almost want to say that it's A tier. Getting that extra crowd control, but it's really only for Shadow Priests. Who else would really benefit from getting this that can play it? Mage, you get a nice little instant crowd control instead of a sheep. Might be situationally okay. But it's basically Shadow Priests and Mages if you're going to play Panda. Rogues have Gouge, not really going to be too useful. Druids can't be Panda, so it's probably like, I want to say it's A tier, but it's like bottom of the A tier, and it's only for those situations. Maybe a warrior, maybe, right? Maybe a warrior, because you don't have access to in-cap DR. Could be all right. War Stomp for Tauren. Again, I've still seen a lot of War Stomping Ret Paladins for some reason. They're still just staying Tauren. You can global somebody in a DR War Stomp as a Ret Paladin. Things like War Stomp and a Cyclone can be really good. I've seen a couple of like Arcane Mages as Tauren. War Stomp into a Poly can be decent, but it's probably still better to just be Night Elf to avoid cast in the situation or get more damage from being human, or maybe even undead. So Tauren's probably like B tier. It's really only good if you're a class that can set up crowd control out of the War Stomp, or you're a class that can kill somebody in a War Stomp. Maybe it's even worse than Kultiran. Maybe like somewhere in between here. Maybe slightly better than Draenei. I'd say Mechanome is probably better than Draenei. Maybe close. It's better than Goblin for sure. Troll, this one is a really good one. The snare reduction is really underrated, especially with how prevalent snares are and things like Curse of Exhaustion from Warlocks. If you're a warrior, I believe you have a talent on your base tree that also reduces snares, so you can stack those together, and Curse of Exhaustion doesn't last nearly as long. It's actually kind of sleeper for getting through slows, and the added haste is a huge amount of extra damage for a lot of casters. I think that Troll could actually just be really good for just a throughput option at the moment, and the added snare reduction is really nice for just getting out of those sticky situations. So tempted to put Troll on A tier, honestly. It's a really good pick because right now the most important thing is damage. It's going to give you a lot of throughput. Doesn't have the same types of kind of crowd control when it's close with the snare reductions, but not going to feel as impactful as removing a Mind Games or removing a Solar Beam or immuning a Chaos Bolt. But I actually think Troll is pretty decent right now. Maybe even put it a little bit ahead of Panda. Void Elf, this is honestly a really good one. It gives you damage output on a random proc. It gives you extra mobility. I think Void Elf is honestly really good. The ratios are getting a lot more competitive with each other. It's again going to be kind of like more comp situational. If you're fighting something like an RMP, you'd probably rather be an Orc or a human. If you're fighting a Boomkin, probably rather be a Dark Iron Dwarf or a Gnome. If you're fighting a lot of Shadow Priest Warlock stuff, probably a good idea to be an undead. So you got to look at like what are the most popular options. Boomkin probably being the most popular, so Gnome is a really good pick there. RMP maybe even the second closest, or Warlocks being the second closest, so human, orc, and undead. But Void Elf is really good into melee comps. So if you're struggling to kite and you're like a Warlock, or a Shadow Priest or something like that, and you're struggling to avoid getting attacked, Void Elf can be really good. It's similar to High Mountain Tauren and Goblin, but you get the benefit of the damage bonuses actually being good for you, and it looks sick AF, right? It looks sick AF. So I think Void Elf, there's an earned point to say that it could be an A tier potential, especially for ladder play. Obviously, if you're in a tournament, you're going to flip between any of these depending on the circumstance that's best for you. But I could see, avoiding melee DPS, things like Turbo Cleave right now, and even Ret Warrior is still pretty popular, and kiting them being really good. Vulpera, you get a little bit of an extra heal, really powerful into Demo Warlocks. That's kind of the sleeper effect of Vulpera that we noticed throughout the tournament season in Season 1. Really OP into Demo Locks. So if you hate Demo Locks and you get targeted by them, Vulpera could be really good there. And honestly, that alone is dragging it up from C to probably B. Again, it's S tier into Demo. If you're fighting a Demo Lock, it's S tier. But overall for the ladder, you're going to see them, but not 100% of the time. So it's probably coming in at like B tier overall for ladder play. But definitely one that's slept on, certainly really good into Demo Locks, because of the effects. When a new target hits you, you take less damage. So every new summoned imp or new summoned demon pet does a little bit less damage to you on the first hit. It's a huge amount of damage reduction. Definitely not to be slept on. Worgen, you get a sprint, you get crit. It's really not good. I want to say it's probably like down here with these guys, just really not good. Zandalari Troll. Again, pretty much only Paladin can benefit from this with Bubble and then, the heal up ratio. You get a bunch of other stat procs that you can get. They're okay. It's not spectacular. It's probably better than the bottom tier. Still going to be a little bit more useful in overall throughput, but it's really only for Paladins. And even as a Paladin, why would you be this instead of human? It just doesn't make sense to me. as far as the decision making in between those two. So unfortunately coming in a little bit lower, but let me know what you guys think, what your experience is with the racials on the ladder. Let me know in the comments down below. Am I totally off base? Like, have you found some way to make Worgen insane on the ladder? Because again, I want this to be a good resource for everybody to make the right choice when they're making their characters. But the racials are getting a lot closer to each other in terms of competitive play for ladder, I think. And again, in tournament, you would swap them depending on your situation. Like I said, Vulpera could be S into Demo locks, Gnome is S into Boomies. I'd say Dark Iron Dwarf probably averages out to the most efficient, and Night Elf averages out to one of the most efficient. But some of these A tier could be really good, like getting an extra troll ratio on an Incarn for a Boomkin or a Combustion for a Fire Mage. That extra mobility to avoid melee in situations that are, you know, a struggle for a Shadow Priest or a Warlock could be really good. The stun reductions again for RMP are still going to be invaluable. Extra crowd control for Panda can situationally be really good. These are all decent options for ladder play, certainly. But other than that, thank you very much for watching the video. Hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.